All right, let's talk about the most misunderstood piece on the entire chessboard, the pawn. They say pawns are the soul of chess, and honestly, learning how to use them right is what separates good players from great ones. And today, we're going to show you exactly why. You've probably heard this quote a million times, right? Pawn structure is the skeleton of the position. And it's not just some fancy saying. Your pawns are literally the framework that gives your whole game its shape. They decide where the action is going to happen, and they tell your other pieces where to go. But what does that really mean in a practical sense? How do we take that idea of a skeleton and turn it into a real, tangible advantage? Well, that's what this is all about. We're going to get past the theory and turn pawn structure into a weapon you can start using to win more games. Okay, first things first, we have to learn how to actually see these structures on the board. Think of these as the fundamental blueprints, the different kinds of skeletons that a position can have. So there are 7 essential pawn structures that every chess player really needs to know. Now, that's a lot to chew on at once, so to make things super clear, we're going to focus on 3 of the absolute most common ones: the isolated pawn, the pawn chain, and the passed pawn. Get these 3 down and you'll have a massive head start. Let's start with the isolated pawn, or as you'll often hear it called, the IQP. This thing is a lone warrior. It's a pawn that has no friendly pawns next to it to offer support. And that isolation, well, it's both its greatest strength and its biggest weakness. It's a real double-edged sword. You see, the story of the IQP is really a tale of 2 different games. In the middle game, it's a dynamic beast. It helps you control the center, it opens up files for your rooks, diagonals for your bishops, and it can be a launch pad for a crushing attack. But once pieces start getting traded off and you head into an endgame, that hero becomes a liability. It's just a sitting duck, a permanent weakness that your opponent can poke and prod for the rest of the game. Next up, the complete opposite of the isolated pawn, the pawn chain. This is all about strength in numbers. Each pawn protects the one behind it, forming this solid wall that can dominate a huge part of the board. It's like a defensive phalanx. But here's the catch. Every chain has a weak link, and for a pawn chain, it's the pawn at the very bottom of the chain, the base. It's the only one that isn't protected by another pawn. So the whole game can suddenly revolve around this one point. Your job is to attack the base of their chain while you defend yours like your life depends on it. The passed pawn. I love this one. A grandmaster once famously called a passed pawn a criminal because it should be locked up. And that's exactly what it feels like. It's a pawn that has a clear runway to the other side of the board. No enemy pawns can get in its way. It is, without a doubt, one of the most powerful advantages in all of chess. Now, much like the isolated pawn, the value of a passed pawn completely transforms throughout the game. In a messy middle game, it might just be a distraction, something that forces your opponent to tie a piece down to babysit it. But once the board clears out for the endgame, it becomes the star of the show. That unstoppable march to become a queen is very often the thing that decides who wins and who loses. Okay, so now we can spot the key structures. But that's only half the battle, right? Knowing what something is doesn't mean you know what to do with it. So now we're going to move from the static blueprint to the dynamic act of building. Let's talk about the principles of smart pawn play. If you only remember one thing from this whole explainer, please let it be this. Every single pawn move you make is permanent. Unlike bishops or knights or rooks, pawns can't go backward. Once you push a pawn, that's it. You've changed the skeleton of the position forever. You can't undo it. That's what makes pawn moves so important and so dangerous. Let's make this super concrete. Imagine you push your f-pawn from f2 to f4. What do you gain? Well, you get more space. Maybe you're getting ready for a kingside attack. That's the upside. But what did you just give away? You've permanently weakened the squares around your king, like e3 and g3. That pawn can never, ever defend those squares again. Every pawn move is a trade-off. And that brings us to the golden rule of pawn play. Before you make a move, before your hand even touches that pawn, just stop for a second and ask yourself, what squares am I leaving weak? Seriously, making that one question a habit will save you from so many self-inflicted wounds. So if we're so worried about creating weaknesses, how do we ever attack? Well, the answer is the pawn break. A pawn break is the main tool you have to crack open a position. It's a pawn push specifically designed to challenge your opponent's pawn chain, open up lines for your pieces, and grab the initiative.
In most positions, the biggest question is, where's my pawn break, and how do I stop theirs?
And finally, let's talk about harmony. Your pawns and your pieces have to work together as a team. So often, the best pawn move you can make is the one that helps out your worst piece. You know that bishop that's been stuck behind your own pawns all game? A single pawn move can set it free, turning it from a dud into a monster. Your pawns should be liberating your army, not trapping it.
All right, we've looked at the static shapes, we've covered the dynamic principles. Now, let's put it all together into something you can actually use, an actionable checklist to take with you to your next game.
Here it is, your 6-point pawn move checklist. Before you push a pawn, just run through this in your head. What squares will it no longer control? Is this creating a permanent weakness? Does it help my worst piece? Does it fit my plan? Am I setting up a pawn break? And, of course, does it make my king safer or weaker? If you can make this thought process a habit, your game will improve dramatically, I promise.
So the next time you sit down to play, don't just see those pawns as the weakest pieces on the board. See them for what they really are, the skeleton of the game, the soul of your strategy, and the real key to unlocking your potential. The only question is, which pawn in your next game will you think twice about moving?